In a dismal future, a blazing neon light from the past cuts a pathway toward tomorrow. Bounding into comics and Brett R. Smith present Escape from the Future.
Welcome to Escape from the Future, brought to you by Bounding into Comics. I'm your host and comic veteran, Brett R. Smith, and joining me today is another comic veteran and comic book creator, Chris Wozniak. You've probably seen Chris's work in the pages of Marvel and DC on titles such as Excalibur, The Spectre, Justice League of America, Batman, Blue Beetle, and many others. He's also the creator of his own books, such as the noir anthology series, Barren Soil. Thanks for joining me.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. So I was checking out some of your work you've done over the years for both Marvel and DC, and it's impressive. There's a lot there. I was just curious, what was your first pro gig with the big two?
At DC, for sure. And I started out inking. My very first real piece was I inked the Justice League cover over Luke McDonald.
Okay.
The death of the gypsy when she's getting shot. Those are my inks.
Nice.
And then from there, I think the first book I drew. There was a Creeper miniseries that we said started that Keith Giffen wrote and that I was drawing, but we did an issue, and then they needed someone to take over the Spectre, and they needed it was literally I was in Andy Helfer's office and Dick Giordano walked in and he was like, "We got to cancel the Spectre. It's just dropped under 60,000. Can you imagine that? That was the reason. It fell under 60,000. We got to chop this." And he goes, "Unless there's a reason to keep it." And Andy was like, "Well, Doug likes the book, and all right, well, if Doug likes it, you can keep doing it, but you got to find another artist by Monday."
Mm-hmm. And
so he just turned to me and I was like, "Well, give it to him," like that. And then Andy's like, "You want to draw the Spectre?" And I was like, "Sure."
Yeah.
And that's how that happened. Yeah.
That's how that stuff like that happens, especially, you're in the room with other guys. It's it's one of those things where, right place, right time, opportunity and ability meet, which is always my definition of luck. That's a great story. What year was this? Is this the 80s?
80s, 85 probably.
Yeah. Wow. 60,000. Even 20 years ago when I was coloring for DC, that was typically the threshold of where you're going to get your book cut. And now I think it's kind of like the top of what you're selling these days outside of probably the flagship books.
Yeah, that was DC's, that was their axe. It falls under 60,000, it gets chopped, and we'll do something else. And
that's wild.
60,000 now is a pretty damn good book. Those are good numbers.
Yeah. The 80s, I think the 80s were a healthy comic book market. A lot of retailers back then used to talk about there being a glut of things, too much on the shelf. But I remember, you could get so much back then. Of course, you did have Marvel and DC, but you also had a lot of indie publishers. I remember buying my first manga in the Jade Man Oriental Heroes. You could get the first had all kinds of great stuff, Lone Wolf and Cub. I love the even the Shadow line stuff from Marvel back then. It was kind of more adult themed.
I think
there was something for everybody.
The 80s was a pretty healthy market. I don't know how reflective it was in the numbers, but in the very early 80s, we had the indie boom with First Comics and Pacific Comics and all that. And a lot of that stuff was great. It was lots of good stuff to see. And I think they lit a fire under, those indie guys with that move. I think they lit a fire under the big two's asses because, they started experimenting, especially DC, the DC Bullet days, early mid 80s, they started trying new things and new titles, and a lot of it started to work. Blue Devil and revamping Justice League and stuff like that. A lot of the stuff did well,
Yeah.
So I don't think it was a bad time really. Ronin, the first time we put a creator's on the title of a book, the very first time.
Yeah, lots of competition. I think that breeds a healthy market,
And the Baxter format, they tried to move up to better printing and better paper and stuff to kind of, to hit the level that the European comics were at, so for some of the specialty stuff, forward thinking, so especially at DC.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's talk about the here and now. You've got Barren Soil, which you're crowdfunding, and
Yeah.
right now you've got it up on Kickstarter, Indiegogo, and also Fund My Comic.
Yes.
And we'll link to all that stuff. But I wanted to share this. So you've got this up on a Google Drive.
Yep, free for everyone to read. That's the way I'm going to do it. I got the first one done, and I figure, look, I know it's good. I know the series is good, and instead of just like doing a teaser, I'm just going to let everybody read the first one, and then get you to sign up, and then I'll pick up on the subsequent issues.
Sure.
It's the last page. It's a spoiler.
Yes.
It's a thriller. Yeah.
Right. So this is a 32-page graphic novel. I've read it. I really liked it. It's very much a neo-noir, which is right up my alley. And I really like the artwork. You describe it as Alex Toth meets Frank Miller, a little bit of David Mazzucchelli.
Yeah.
I also see a lot of Paul Smith in your work, which I think is really cool because I love Paul Smith. I think he's one of those guys that back in the day was so recognizable when I would pick up a comic. Oh, this is Paul. Like Rick Leonardi was another guy who you just instantly knew, oh, this is Rick's work, because nobody else really looked like that.
Yeah, Paul Smith really made a splash. I mean, it didn't hurt that he was on the X-Men, but but you can't miss him. He's just so unique.
Yeah, this is such a gorgeous panel. So this book follows the story of the character in this panel called the Mourner. Give our viewers an idea of what they can expect in this first issue.
Yeah, the character, is a high school character I had. His name was Mourner. He was initially part of a group, and I brought him back to do like a more adult, modern, mature. That's his first issue. But in the actual stories, that's why the comic book's not called Mourner. It's called Barren Soil. In the actual series, he's never referred to as Mourner. There's a nameless hero, and he'll remain so for the whole series. But it's one of those things where, it's every issue is going to be a thriller. Every issue is going to have, a very dark noir type payoff, and they will all tie together to make one bigger giant story that is, boy, it gets really, really big in scope, the whole thing all told. And it gets, really deep. Like this is just like putting your toe in it, and everybody loves the story here and the art. I caught a break there because I didn't know how the art was going to turn out. I've never drawn like this. It was I just knew that the stories, I had some scripts and I knew the stories needed this type of approach. And so it was my first time like kind of going for it. And I think it worked out fine. Everybody seems to like it, but honestly, I was like, I'm selling stories, and I know the stories are good. So if the storytelling is good, doesn't really matter what the artwork looks like. And everybody says they love the art. I was like, no, read the story. But apparently it worked out a little bit. So I'm happy with that. I'm happy they're happy, and the book's getting like really, really great reaction. So I'm very happy.
Yeah, and also, I'm a colorist, so this is monotone, so I was kind of like, how's this going to look? And then when I jumped into it, I was like, this is really nice. I like this. You've got some spot color, you've got some hues. I love the yellow and kind of that amber sort of look to this first book.
Every issue is a different color. Next one's blue.
Right.
And so the spot color, because I want, the book, lends itself to being black and white. But, I wanted something more, and I figured out a way to story. So every color ties into the actual reveal of the issue. So it's very story oriented. And, the flashback scenes are the ones that are tinted, and, the modern day time is so it works out as a storytelling element too, because anytime I don't have to say, hey, back in, 3 weeks ago, when we go to the tints that drop back a little bit.
Yeah, I had no problem discerning when you flash back and then when you're in present day.
Yeah, the reason for simplifying, it all comes down to one thing, is I wanted to be able to handle it myself. So that's why it's a simpler style, flat colors, monotone with a tint, spot color. So this way, I'm not dependent on colorists. I'm not dependent on inkers. You know, I can handle it all myself. So I'm writing, penciling, inking, coloring, lettering, packaging, publishing. It gets done. It's got my name on it. You know, and if you like it, you know, then you know, I'm to blame or to praise as you see fit. You know,
Right.
So
No, it's nice. I like your color. It's
wait,
it's a real, it's a really
wait. I don't know what page you're on, but don't go to page like 28.
okay.
There's spoilers over there. Yeah.
No problem. No, I really like the color. I like the book. It's just it's kind of refreshing to see some flat stuff, and it's also just for me, it's really graphic,
And it
and
works. You know,
it works.
yeah, you don't need to draw every shoelace and all the seams on the costumes. You know, what does that have to do with the reading experience? You know, if you want to tell a story, you know, this is storytelling. You know, it's you know, the book lives in your mind. You don't have to illustrate every, you know, minute detail. You know, and honestly, sometimes the less you show, the more it comes to life in in the reader's mind, which is where comics live. You know,
Sure.
so you know that's why I think, you know, I got a little bit lucky, but also, you know, it was you know, an educated guess. I thought it would work. You know?
Yeah. No, I think it works really nicely. I'm looking forward to seeing issue 2 with the blues and seeing how you
Yeah.
tackle that. So
It was wild. Yeah.
So, you know, I remember I was reading in the description, it said there's no generic superheroes in this. How
No.
is the Mourner not a generic superhero?
Well, and you'll see why as you read more issues. But this is, you know, this is story driven. It's not superhero driven. It takes place in a real world. And honestly, if I wanted to, I could do all of these stories exactly the same and not have the guy in costume at all. You know, I did it as a visual hook. But you know, if you want to put this on TV, you wouldn't even need the costume if you wanted. It all functions. So it's not, you know, there's no powers in this universe. There is a strange element to everything, but more a little Twilight Zone-y, you know, rather than, and you know, no one could fly or, you know, it's the real world.
Yeah, it's very down to earth. Yeah.
And it's all gonna take place in the early 70s in New York City. You know, for the we get to like issue 10. So it's you know, it's a very grounded book, but it does get strange. You know,
I love period pieces, so I was happy to see that this is the 70s of New York. It's an analog world. There's no devices. There's no tablets. I think you get a better cat and mouse game in the analog world than you do necessarily because
I don't want to read
more
comics.
interesting.
I don't want to read any comics where someone's checking their Twitter feed. Yeah, it's like, who gives a shit? You know, honestly, that's not drama.
Right. Yeah, I think I'm always happy to see period pieces, whether it's TV shows, movies, or comics, because I just think it's a more interesting story and an interesting world. So, but yeah, these flashback sequences are really nice.
Thank you.
I really like these.
I'm glad you liked it. You know, initially, you know, it's weird because when I first got like the first maybe 8 or 10 pages, I was afraid to show it to people. I was like, nobody's gonna like the artwork, you know. And I was a little like, oh, this is different. It's, you know, and I was honestly worried about like letting anybody see it. But I knew I had a good story, and I was like, look, I'm gonna have to let people in. If I can make this, I gotta share it, right? But then it went well. It went real well, you know. So everyone's like, "Oh, it looks great." And I was like, well, "Did you read it?" And I was like, "Oh, it looks fantastic." I was like, "Read the story."
Yeah, right.
Just there for the story.
Well, honestly, the artwork hooked me first because I'm much more of a visual guy, and I
got lucky. I'm so thankful to hear that.
You know, the other thing that it reminded me of for some reason, and I've got to go back and look at back issues, but your rendering reminds me of Brian Stelafreeze's work on Cyclops back in the 80s. Early 90s. I think that was a late 80s book that he did for some independent publisher. And it's
I'm familiar with Brian.
It's real. It's just super graphic. And I remember just being like, I've never seen anything visually that looks like this. And there's hints of it here and there that kind of reminds me of that. I hadn't thought of that series in like forever.
I'm going to take that, you know, all day. Like, Brian is amazing.
Brian is amazing.
I didn't see the particular work that you're referencing, but you know, like I said, I'll take any in the same sentence. I'm fine with that.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the first issue, and like you mentioned, this is already done and ready for print, correct?
Yep. You can read the whole thing right there. I mean, I don't want you to go to the end because, like I said, they're thrillers and they have spoilers.
Sure.
And payoffs at the end and stuff. But anybody else that wants to read it, it's right there on the Kickstarter and the GoFundMe and
Yep.
fund my comic. It's literally right up front, first paragraph. Here's the book for free.
Yeah, we'll link to that too in the description. Once the campaign is closed, when do you expect to ship to backers?
I backed it up. I could ship much earlier, but I said September because I want the second one out before. I expect to have the second book done early summer. I've got some vacations booked and stuff, but look, I'm trying to take August off. I expect to have issue 2 done before, in July.
Wow.
So
and what's the long-term arc for this? How many issues?
12 issues.
12 issues.
Yeah, I've written the end of issue 12. The way this all came together is I had had a bunch of stories that I didn't use, and what I did was I pulled all the dark ones, and I was like, if I finagle some of the characters, I could connect these and put a whole thing together. And so that's what I did. So now I'm in the process of just making that cohesive. But I mean, I've got 8 scripts, and I just literally, the ones that are not written, I know what's in them. I know what's going to happen. Not fully scripted for every page or anything, but I know the issues. And but I did just 4 or 5 days ago, maybe, I wrote the end of issue 12. I had the whole thing all planned, sorted out. But I needed to write the ending for the entire 12 issue series, like the end of the season. And I wrote that, and I was up for 2 hours. I wrote it in the middle of the night, and I was like, I can't believe I just came up with that. I was like, I was impressed with my ability, with my own ability to actually hit something so hard.
Yeah.
And so, I'm very now, you do the first one, you're like, oh, is this going to work? And now I know this works.
Yeah.
And now I see the big picture. And now I'm like Ahab, trying to get to that end of the 12th issue. So that's where I am creatively. Yeah.
It happens. Sometimes you impress yourself. Often we're our own worst critics. We see all the things that we think are wrong. That's not typically what the laymen are looking at when they look at our work or read our work, but it's fun when you can
see the one little mistake.
Yeah. But on the rare occasion that you really knock it out of the park, man, those projects, for me, those pages, those books, those covers, whatever they are, it's one of those really satisfying things about being an artist. And it's one of those things that keep us in the game. I mean, sometimes you just hit it and it, and it's awesome, and you're happy, and there's nothing to change.
No.
Yeah.
And I honestly, I always thought I was a better writer than I was an artist. That's way more natural to me. It's not hard work. If I need to write a comic book, I don't even need to know what it's about. Give me, it's about a goldfish. Okay, see you next week. Here's a script. And so that to me is easy, fun, creative, no problem. Drawing a comic book is hard work for me. It's tough. So it's time consuming, and I don't even know that drawing comes natural to me. I gotta, I'm just I've never ever called myself an artist. I'm a guy that can make comics, and so I draw as well as I have to be able to make a comic, and then I stop, because that's, I'm just interested in getting the story across, and that's it. If I want to do something, super, impressive, I'll try and do a painting or something, but I just I can't spend a million hours on a single page just so you can go, wow, look at all the detail. In my mind, because I like guys like Miller, and and a lot of the more old school guys, and
me too.
Yeah, the simplicity of the approach and the storytelling. You get it across, and then go to the next panel. It's you don't have to, adding more lines and more details. It doesn't do anything for the reader.
But as you well know, it's a lot harder to do that simple graphic comic book, almost borderline cartoony thing that Toth does. Mazzucchelli taps into that big time.
Great.
Frank as well has kind of this almost minimalism that he kept edging closer and closer towards as he got further in his career. But it's hard to do the simple stuff. It's hard to do flat colors and make them look correct.
Yeah, I mean, I think that with taking that whole approach, for me, I was just trying to streamline the workflow
process.
so I can control everything.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so but the byproduct of this is I've wound up with a book that doesn't look like anything else. Everyone else is doing so much.
Right.
This is like, oh wait, it's kind of refreshing. It's like, look, this is a story. We're just going to read the story here. We're not going to. There's not going to be 18 variant covers. It's like the cover that I picked is the right cover. It's going to have one cover. It has to do with the story. So that's how it's going to be. It's like there's not going to be a lot of fluff in Barren Soil. You're going to get a great story, and you're going to remember that you read that story. But other than that, we're not going to. I'm not going to make 95 variants and
Yeah. No, we were talking about music off the air, and they often refer to great albums as all filler and no killer, and I think that's what you got here, which is
thank you. I'll take that because that's what I just listen to full albums. So.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, let me ask you about the plagiarism case that you had against Warner Brothers and DC Comics, and is it Michael Uslan? I think that's how you say his name.
Michael Uslan.
Right.
Yeah.
So we've covered this on Bounding into Comics pretty heavily over the years, and you had a judge dismiss the case. I think it was last week. Why don't you talk about that, and also talk about what's going to happen next?
Ruling, it wasn't dismissed, but there was a ruling against us. I mean,
gotcha.
we had the right to appeal, but the judge based his entire ruling on the testimony of Paul Levitz, who said I didn't have a right to submit the story, which is nonsense and a lie. And we proved, that DC, unsolicited material all the time, as far back from the 70s, in the 80s when I did it, into the 90s and 2000s. We proved they were doing it up until last year. Mm-hmm. And so, so we had testimony and evidence and everything that showed that Paul was just full of shit, and so, but the judge, ruled on it as if it was a fact when all that stuff was clearly in dispute. And when something's in dispute, he's not supposed to do that. He's supposed to push it onto the jury. That's what the jury's for, when facts are in dispute. And so we got the bullshit ruling, and we thought this is an easy flip. The ruling is ridiculous because, the notion that, like they own something because you submitted it is farcical on the face of it. Because I'll just what happens if I write that same story, same Batman story, but and before I send it in by email, I decide I'm going to change the names and call it a Spider-Man story, and at the exact same time I send it to Marvel and DC. So now they can both claim they own the same story. They both got on the same circumstance. Can they both sue each other for copyright? It's ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense. So we knew we could flip it, but the issue was that within an hour of the ruling, Warner Brothers came and they offered the same deal that they've been offering 4 or 5 times. And we always told them to kick rocks, is that hey, if you walk away, if you give up your right to appeal, well, everyone can just, wash their hands of this and go home. And that's essentially, the deal they put up. And I, again, our response was, fuck no, you're crazy. Because in trial, we thought we had like a 75%, 80% chance of winning. That we thought it was that bad. After, especially everything we found on Discovery, that it looked like also the Affleck story is also based on my story. And so, the notion that Matt Reeves, created this goes out the window, but the judge wouldn't let us see Affleck's script. The judge wouldn't even let us see the first draft of Reeves' script. This is a copyright case. So, it was shit like that we were battling. And, they've got a lot of money, obviously. Yeah. And, I was like, maybe they bought the judge a fucking summer house. Who knows what's going on here, Yeah. And so, and it was one of those things where we had to basically turn up like 20 grand for an appeal that we were not expecting, because we felt we had met our burden and beyond by tons. And so we were just getting ready for trial. And all of a sudden we're faced with this appeal. And then, Warner tried to put pressure, saying, well, we'll give you to Monday to, the ruling comes down Friday afternoon, and then Sunday's Easter, and we have until Monday, to make the call. And it's, otherwise I'm faced with some kind of like $3 million legal bill, And so, the other times we told them get lost, and this time we basically did again. But we had just, one day essentially turn up like 20 grand or something. And we couldn't do it in time. And Monday rolls around and we're still stalling because we got feelers that were trying to, but then, it got to be like Tuesday. My lawyer was like, look, you better, they're getting fucking angry. And so, you got to make that call. And so, with that looming over my head and the money not in pocket, because if we had the money, absolutely would have just kept going. We would have appealed, and we think we would have flipped and went to trial. And at trial, I think we would have crushed them, because all the shit we found out, it was very clear to us that we were in the right in this case. But I got family, I got a house, and right. And so at that point, with the judgment looming and the money not in pocket, I said, "Fuck it, we got to walk away." So that's what we did. It just, after all of that bullshit, is okay. It's a draw. Everyone go home. So that's what happened. Yeah.
Yeah, and the lawyers are the only people that basically win, which is typically what we see a lot. What do you think this is going to do going forward for creatives?
This is really bad case law.
Well, yeah, what kind of precedent does this set for creatives going forward with Marvel and DC?
What the judge ruled on is essentially not been how copyright law has traditionally worked at all. He set a crazy precedent saying that if you submit something, that they can confiscate it. Or not only that, because it had the name Batman in it, he's like, well, then they own it, it's copyright. And I was like, no. And my lawyer quite rightly pointed out, well, you can't copyright a name. So, you can't make that call. And then the judge came back with, well, yeah, but he also used the Joker's name and Alfred's name. And it's like, it doesn't matter. You can't copyright any name. So it doesn't matter if it's got 30,000, names in it. It's like, if you can't copyright it, it can't be copyright infringement. And he just ruled on it anyway. So, again, I don't want to say shenanigans, but it seemed shady to me. The thought process that we were seeing, and the fact that we presented evidence that submit stories, and that they did it on a regular basis and are still doing it. And when the judge made his ruling, he essentially pretended that didn't exist, that we never showed him that. And so it was one of those things where, okay, we can flip this on appeal, but do you have the money? And that's what it always comes down to with these cases against these big companies. As big fish eats the little fish, they wait you out and they stall until 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 you run out of resources, and then you get a bail.
It's there's no incentive if you're a young creative out there with a great story, because you run into something like this, and it's David versus Goliath, and these giant corporations, which both Marvel and DC have become. They're parts of these multinational corporations. They just carry a bigger club, and they've got armies of lawyers. And it's like you said, when they don't have power, they delay and delay and delay, cost the little guy a whole lot of money, and they just try and wait him out.
Yeah, and that's what they did again. And we didn't even care. We knew they were going to do that, but we knew that we had them beat at trial, so we didn't give a shit. We were like, we're just going to wait until we get to court. Then you put this in front of 12 people, and we're gonna convince them all.
Yeah. I mean, you guys ultimately were trying to get in front of a jury and make your case.
That's all we wanted. Yeah, that's all we wanted.
I think that's a shame that's not going to be heard by a jury. I think that's criminal.
Yeah, I think it's a ridiculous call. I think, but now this case is going to turn up, and this is not the end of it. I'm not saying, oh, it's Mike. I'm just saying, the precedent, they're going to wield this like a fucking hammer.
Absolutely.
Start clubbing people.
Yeah.
So it's literally right now. Marvel can take John Byrne's X-Men. They can take that, not put his name on it, publish it, turn it into a movie, whatever the fuck they want to do, and they'll cite my case now. They'll say, oh, it's ours. It's got our characters in it. And that's insane, because there's no contract, there's no agreement, they can, but now they're essentially can confiscate work, And we reached out, we didn't have a lot of time. We reached out to the, Comic Book Legal Defense Fund. We just needed like $20,000 to push it into trial, and we didn't have a lot of time, and we didn't get a response from them in time.
Wow.
I don't know if we got a no or if we didn't get a response at all, because like I said, we were very it was time sensitive. So I'm literally not 100% sure, but we certainly didn't get a response that satisfactory enough in time. And so therefore, with that, hanging over my head, I decided to walk away.
Yeah, that doesn't make the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund look good.
It wasn't. I was like, this is what they exist for.
Exactly.
So, and if they're not going to take this one on, that will affect every creative person going forward. Then what do they do?
Yeah. What do they function for?
Yeah.
What do people give money to them for at this point?
Yeah. So, it's problematic, and it's going to cause a lot of headaches for creative people going forward.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I did what I could do. I fought until, there was, and I don't give a shit who they are. There's right and there's wrong.
Yeah.
And so, I'll punch the bully. I don't give a fuck, but we can't, but when there's 30 of them and I'm alone, and
yeah.
it's
no. This is what they call lawfare, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what's going on here. So
because initially Warner Brothers didn't even dispute that they used my story in the movie. They went after my copyright. They were like, no, we want to control, that's our story. And it was like, I didn't sell it to you. That's what they went after, and that's, right until the end, that's what they were focused on, was basically taking away my copyright. That's what they focused their whole case on. They, standing in front of anybody, and if I can get you to sit down for 15 minutes, I can prove to you that that's my story in the film, and I think I could literally prove it to almost anyone that did, especially now, after we've gone through everything and we found out more. There was no indication anywhere that it wasn't my story, and it was everything we found out indicated that it absolutely was. We like our side of events was just proven time and time again. So we were just ready. We just wanted to get to trial, and it didn't happen. That's that.
Do you think this will also affect guys like Affleck, who come in with a project like this that they love, and they've got their own ideas, and they put together a script and submit it? Do you think that's also going to cause even actors who are writers like Affleck to maybe think twice?
If you're if you're Leonardo DiCaprio and you come to the studio, they're not going to fuck you because they know how much selling power you have. But if you're Joe Schmo and you got a killer idea for a new flick, I recommend that you don't show it to any goddamn buddy. Do it. Put that out in the way that you control that. And leave it at that. Don't. I don't recommend anybody even pitch anything anymore.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. For artists out there, somebody like Michael Eastland comes up and hands them their card and says, "Hey, let's talk sometime." What should they do?
Yeah, I got a great idea for a Batman flick. We never did it, and then your name is off of it and it gets made. It's retarded. Yeah. So.
Yeah, it's bizarre. I don't understand any of this, especially considering that the MCU, the DC films, the wellspring of all of their creative content and entertainment comes from guys like you.
Creative people. It comes
from creative people.
Yeah. Like Marvel and DC don't make anything. It's the people that walk into the office and say, "Hey, I got an idea." So that's where everything comes from. Everything that they sell comes from creative people, pencilers, inkers, writers. They don't actually generate anything at all on their own.
Right.
It's when people walk in and say, "Oh, yeah, I love these characters. I've always wanted to work with them," and they create the Marvel universe and the DC universe, and and who do they shit on most across the board? It's always they treat them like those are the guys that that basically do all the heavy lifting, and then they get nothing for it on the back end.
Yeah, it's not good. And it's like we talked about, it's going to set a precedence going forward. And I just think you're going to see less creative output and less great ideas. I mean, we've already seen this kind of precipitous decline of Marvel and DC over the last, 10, 15 years from the standpoint of stories and creatives.
Why would you go to Marvel or DC with your new character when they're like, "Oh, this is great, we'll do it," but you don't get to own any of it?
Right.
Who would, here's a paycheck, go buy pizza, and then come back with another one next month, because that's all you're getting.
Right.
Who would,
Yeah.
And that's why you've got 35 versions of Spider-Man and 25 versions of Batman. And that's why there's a multiverse and everything, because, the well has run dry. No one in the last 20 years has created anything of any significance for Marvel or DC, and they're not gonna. It's over.
Yeah. I think that, I had Brian Pulido on, and we were talking about the bad girl craze of the 90s and how that's kind of one of these kind of watershed moments in comics where you really did have this sort of organic wave that came out of a necessity, out of, these three comics kind of hitting the shelves: Lady Death, Vampirilla, and She, sort of all within, I think, like 3 or 4 months. And I kind of likened it to grunge, where you had Nirvana, you had Soundgarden, you had Nirvana, you had Soundgarden, and you had Pearl Jam all released those first albums, or their albums, within like about 3 months of each other. And I look back at that 90s bad girl craze and all that came out of it and all the creativity that came out of it, and launched a lot of careers, my own included, working with Chaos. But I think that this crowdfunding scene and creator-owned projects like yours and others out there, which I highlight here, often, I think that's the future of comics, and I think it's one of the most exciting indie scenes I've seen since the '90s bad girl craze.
Yeah, because in those days, and creative people are dummies when it comes to business. It's just true. We're interested in making things, right? We just want to, isn't this great idea? Look what I can do. I made a story. I made some art. I made this. I made that. Look at the song I wrote. But when it comes to the back end of business, creative people don't know anything. And it's only now that guys are, with the internet and everything, people are getting educated, and they're they begin to understand that you need to control your intellectual property if you want to control your fate. And so that's why, everybody's jumped ship. And look what's happened. Like someone like Graham Nolan, who worked for DC for a million years, and then he goes into self-publishing. And he's in his gravy,
Mm-hmm.
And that's what needs to happen across the board,
Yeah. It's happening more and more. I'm watching all these guys. We were talking off air about Skybound, and all these guys jumping ship from the big two, doing their own thing over at, big names: Brian Hitch, Francis Manipool. These are heavy hitters, man.
Yeah.
Brad Anderson. These guys are all.
Forget about it. It's not like some unknown guy or something. If you've got a following and you jump ship, you will. It doesn't take much to pay you. What the big two will pay you. That is a pittance, relatively speaking. To not everybody's going to get rich. Crowdfunding. Not everyone's going to get $100,000 a book. But you chances are you're going to do better than anything Marvel or DC will provide for you.
Right.
And big takeaway is that it's always yours. You can sell it later. It's yours. You do what you want. You control it. You say what happens to it. And you can't put a price on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, last question: what are you watching? Any new TV shows or movies that you can recommend?
Strangely enough, you can see this is some of my Blu-rays back here.
Yeah, physical media. Physical media is the way to go.
Media, and I'm very much into old school shit. However, like streaming, unless it's the British Bake Off or something, you know what I mean? It's like I am not intrigued with any of it, because generally it doesn't hold up. Every once in a while somebody has a little gem or something. I've just this week saw the first few episodes of Ripley, which is a new take on the talented Mr. Ripley, and it's really well done. So you just watch the first episode, and it's actually directed, and it's actually acted, and it's shots. They set up shots and everything. There's an approach to it, like especially the first episode, where essentially, except for a couple of scenes where the guy's on the subway and stuff like that, there's not another human in any other scene unless they're necessary to the scene. And I've never seen anybody else do that before, and it sets such a vibe, to show that the isolation that this guy's in, that he has no friends, or and that was just fucking clever as fuck, because like they're in New York City. He's actually in my old neighborhood, the Lower East Side, where I grew up, and they're like on Pitt Street or whatever, not a soul on the streets. It was awesome, and it's like I was like, wow, that's fucking smart. And so it's one of those things where the guy who's doing that show, he's got a vision, and so and that's really enjoyable to see something like that. I haven't seen, I think it's 8 episodes for the first season, but for the first few episodes, I was like, I'll watch it. And I didn't even realize it was the talented Mr. Ripley initially, until they mentioned the Greenleaf shipping yard.
Okay.
And I was like, oh, wait a minute, this is Ripley.
Right.
And I was like, okay, I'm in, And so, yeah, so that's one I would definitely say check out, because
Mhm.
the first episode shot really well, really nice shots. Everything's well framed, everything's well acted. It's, it's someone making a real effort.
Mhm.
And so every once in a while, with all the crap that's out there, somebody
Yeah.
pulls one out. And so,
Yeah.
that's what you get to look forward to.
You got some great physical media behind you. Yeah, and like you, I like to watch a lot of old school stuff. If you could recommend one thing behind you from
There's
the
a
old
lot.
school stuff, what would you recommend?
Oh boy.
I know when you stare at it, it's kind of
Yeah.
mesmerizing.
uh, oh boy. I I tend to take deep dives with actors or directors or stuff like, and I'll
Yeah.
go through all their the best of all their stuff. I have a tendency to go back to Cary Grant and Jimmy Stewart, my favorite two actors, but also Paul Newman.
Yeah.
Even the movies that are not great, he's great in. He's one of those guys.
Yeah.
And it's, for my money, the last true movie star, Paul Newman. And so, but if you haven't seen, if that's, if it's too old for you, give it a go, but and watch something like The Hustler.
Yeah.
Because they don't make films like that anymore.
Yeah.
That type of thing. Or Anatomy of a Murder or something like that.
Mhm.
Good solid 50s black and white film.
Mhm. Yeah.
So that's where my head's at right now. I'm watching a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
And some
Well,
of the more fun
you
things, like
can see it in your work. You can see it in Barren Soil. Funny enough,
yeah,
you're
you're right. Yeah,
talking
think of that.
Twilight Zone, which is classic black and white. I have I own The Verdict, which is Sidney Lumet. You're talking about Paul
Yeah.
Newman, and that's in my stack for us to watch
Great movie.
here next weekend. But yeah, and
that-
also
That's
also
early or late 70s, isn't it?
early 80s and very noir.
Yeah.
Very super noir in that in that movie. It's just shot so beautifully, and the shadows and the blacks. I just absolutely love it. So,
And plus, you get Paul Newman, who's like, you could watch him do anything, and it's
I think Jack Warden's in that. I mean, it's got an incredible cast. But that's the other thing about going back, is you end up with these stacks of talent in these movies. Not only the director, but the cinematographer, and it's got a great lead, and it's got these great supporting actors that you've seen elsewhere. It's things that you just don't quite get these days.
And you don't get performances like that anymore, because there was a style of acting. Drama in those days was dramatic. And to make a drama today, like I can't remember the show was. I think it was on Netflix, and my girlfriend was kind of like half watching it while she was working. It was a background show for her, and so every time I came into the room, it was on, and nothing was happening. And like I walked in on the show, must have been 20 times, and it's people like texting each other, and I was like, who gives a shit about it? Who wants to watch this? This is the mundane crap in our lives. Do I want to see it on screen now?
That's not what escapism is about.
Yeah,
you're trying to escape that type of shit.
Yeah, of course. And then but the thing is that the people that are writing and directing these things, this is what they've grown up with now. They think that,
Yeah, no, that's the other problem. Is it's like what's it's kind of like, what is dramatic storytelling to people? Well, at this point, you got to ask what generation. It's like and when you came up watching movies, where it's like with Gen Xers,
drama is like, oh look, they're having a Twitter battle,
right?
And while you sit in your room, it's like, it's not life.
Yeah, I think those shows
you never learn from it either.
If a show isn't good enough to where you can walk in and out of the room, I mean, it's kind of that's a good sign that it's not a good show. A good show is something, or a good movie is something that maybe even you've seen, that you can't help but sit down and just engage in.
I can't even, like the movies that I watch, I would never pause a movie and go get a glass of water. I'm in that film,
right?
It's like, and if I had to, like, oh my God, I just got to go to the bathroom. So it's like, I will pause that movie, back it up 30 seconds. Like, there's no way I would skip a second of it.
Re-immerse yourself. Yeah.
I wouldn't skip anything in the opening credit. I wouldn't miss a second of it. There's soup to nuts. I got to see the whole thing. I got to be in it. It's got to be loud enough that it drowns out any other sounds. I got to be immersed in that.
Yeah.
And that's what, what film used to be. Music should be. you know, that type of thing, you know.
And comics. Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, comics should be, you know, that experience, you know.
Yeah, it should be that immersive experience. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, sadly, we're out of time. Chris, what's the best way our viewers can support you?
You know, Barren Soil right now is my new project. It's going to be my foreseeable project for quite a while. I'm going to do 12 issues. I got one in the can, just starting the second one. So I'm on Kickstarter, GoFundMe, and Fund My Comic.
Right.
And any one of those, you could jump in. You could read the book for free. So you know, I'm not. You know what you're going to get. And you know, my goal right now is to make issue number 2 better than issue number 1. We just dropped it on all these platforms, getting great reactions, and you know, that's it. Barren Soil on Kickstarter, GoFundMe, and Fund My Comic.
Awesome. What's the best way our viewers can find you and stay up to date on everything you have going on?
I'm on Twitter. Twitter's a cesspool, or X, but you can find me there if you wanted to message me or something. Or I'm on Facebook too, but on Twitter I think Barren Soil _Woz. I believe so. Yeah.
Cool. We'll link to all that stuff so people
Appreciate
can follow you. Awesome. For more videos like this one, subscribe to the Bounding Into Comics channel on YouTube and Rumble. Also, make sure and like this video and leave us a comment. Thanks for hanging out with us, and we'll see you next time.